You wake up angry again. That familiar burning in your chest, that tension in your jaw that greets you before your feet even touch the cold floor. The alarm clock screams at you like an enemy, and already your mind is racing through the list of things you have to endure today. Another commute through traffic that crawls like a dying animal. Another 8 hours in a fluorescent tomb they call an office. Another evening scrolling through your phone looking for something, anything, that might fill the hollow ache inside your chest. You've tried everything, haven't you? You've downloaded meditation apps that promise inner peace in 10 minutes a day. You've practiced breathing exercises that work for exactly as long as you're doing them. You've been to anger management classes where they teach you to count to 10 and visualize calm scenes, as if your rage could be solved with parlor tricks. You've sat in therapy sessions digging through your childhood trauma like an archaeologist of pain, searching for the moment when everything went wrong, the key that will unlock the prison of your fury. There you are again, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile at 6 in the morning, your hands already clenched into fists because the coffee maker is gurgling too slowly, because your phone is vibrating with work emails that couldn't wait until business hours, because the news is full of stories that make you want to scream, because everything feels wrong and you can't even articulate why. The rage bubbles just beneath the surface like magma in a volcano that never quite erupts but never quite settles either. It colors every interaction, every decision, every moment of what should be your precious life. You snap at loved ones over nothing. You feel your blood pressure spike when someone drives too slowly in front of you. You lie awake at night replaying conversations where you said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, felt the wrong thing. You've become a prisoner in your own emotional landscape, and the worst part is you can't remember when it started. Was it the divorce? Was it the job you hate but can't afford to leave? Was it the slow realization that your dreams were just fantasies and your life was becoming exactly what you swore it never would? Or was it something deeper? Something that started so long ago you can't even trace it back to its source? You feel like you're drowning in your own existence, gasping for air in a world that seems designed specifically to suffocate your spirit. Every day feels like a battle you're losing against forces you can't even name. What if I told you that your anger isn't really about the traffic that doesn't move, the boss who doesn't appreciate you, the politicians who disappoint you, or the people around you who seem to live in a completely different reality? What if I told you that the rage you feel every day, that constant sense of being at war with life itself, is actually your soul crying out against a prison you didn't even know you were living in? What if everything you've been taught about anger, about managing it and controlling it and making it go away, has been missing the most important point of all? What if your anger is not a problem to be solved, but a message to be understood, a signal from the deepest part of yourself that something essential has been stolen from your life? Something so fundamental that you can't even live without it, but something so forgotten by our modern world that most people don't even realize it exists. The great scholar of religion Mircea Eliade spent his life understanding something that our modern world has completely forgotten, something so crucial to human well-being that its absence creates the exact kind of chronic anger and frustration that millions of people struggle with every day. He discovered that human beings are not meant to live in what he called the profane dimension alone. We are creatures designed to touch the sacred, to experience the transcendent, to live in constant dialogue with something infinitely greater than our small daily concerns and individual struggles. But somewhere along the way, we've been systematically cut off from this sacred dimension of existence. We've been convinced by a culture obsessed with materialism and efficiency that the mundane, repetitive, mechanical world we see around us is all there is. That meaning is something we have to manufacture rather than discover. That transcendence is primitive superstition, and the only reality is what we can measure and control. This separation, this exile from the sacred dimension of life, is what creates that constant undercurrent of rage that so many of us carry without understanding why. When you live entirely cut off from experiences of transcendence, when your daily routine consists only of moving through profane space and profane time toward profane goals, your soul begins to starve. And a starving soul expresses itself through anger, through frustration, through a constant sense that life is not what it should be, that you're missing something essential, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Eliade discovered through decades of research that every traditional culture throughout history organized life around what he called hierophanies, moments when the sacred breaks through into ordinary reality and transforms it into something meaningful and eternal. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts or theological theories, but lived experiences where people regularly touched something transcendent that made their daily struggles feel meaningful and connected to a larger cosmic order. When a Hindu pilgrim bathes in the sacred waters of the Ganges at sunrise, feeling the ancient ritual cleanse not just their body but their entire relationship to existence, they are experiencing a hierophany. When a Christian takes communion and feels for a moment that the boundary between themselves and the divine has dissolved, that's a hierophany. When an indigenous hunter offers gratitude to the spirit of the animal he has taken, recognizing himself as part of an endless cycle of life and death and renewal, he's participating in a hierophany. These are moments when the veil between worlds becomes thin, when ordinary time stops and what Eliade called sacred time begins, where past, present, and future converge into an eternal now that feels complete and whole and utterly meaningful. In these experiences, individual suffering doesn't disappear, but it takes its proper place within a cosmic story so vast and beautiful that personal pain becomes bearable, even sacred. Your struggles are no longer just your struggles. They become part of the great human story of awakening, of growth, of the soul's journey toward understanding its true nature and purpose. But what happens when an entire civilization loses access to these experiences? What happens when we're raised in a culture that systematically strips away every opportunity for genuine transcendence, that teaches us the sacred is primitive superstition, that convinces us reality consists only of atoms bouncing around in empty space according to mechanical laws? What happens when every institution in our society operates on the assumption that human beings are nothing more than biological machines that can be programmed for maximum efficiency? We become what Eliade called profane human beings, creatures trapped in linear time, condemned to experience life as nothing but a sequence of random events leading nowhere meaningful. Think about your typical day. You wake up in a bedroom designed for nothing but sleep. You eat breakfast foods engineered for convenience. You commute through urban landscapes planned by traffic engineers, rather than people who understood the need for beauty and meaning. You spend hours in buildings designed to maximize productivity, rather than inspire the soul, doing work that serves abstract systems, rather than contributing to anything personally meaningful. You come home exhausted, not just physically but spiritually depleted, to spend your evening consuming entertainment designed to keep you passive rather than engaged with deeper questions. Every day becomes a struggle against meaninglessness, a desperate attempt to find something worth living for in a world systematically stripped of everything that made life meaningful. Every interaction becomes a potential source of frustration because you're trying to extract from ordinary relationships and experiences something they were never designed to provide. You expect your job to fulfill you, but jobs serve economic systems, not human souls. You expect relationships to complete you, but no other person can fill the void that can only be filled by contact with the sacred. You expect possessions and achievements to give you significance, but they can't provide what only comes from recognizing your place in a cosmos that extends beyond individual concerns. And when these things inevitably fail to provide what you're really looking for, when you realize that no amount of success or pleasure can fill the sacred-shaped hole in your heart, you become angry, not just occasionally angry at specific problems, but chronically, inexplicably angry at existence itself. You develop what psychologists call free-floating anxiety, a constant sense that something is wrong. You start to see other people as obstacles rather than fellow travelers. You lose the capacity for wonder, for gratitude, for deep peace that comes from knowing your proper place in the eternal order. You know what touches me most when I read your messages? It's realizing that we're not alone in this search. If you're listening to me now and feel that emptiness, that sensation that something important is missing in your life, I want you to know that I understand exactly what you're going through. There were moments when I also felt completely disconnected from the sacred, lost in the midst of a routine that seemed to suck all the magic out of existence. That's why I want to ask you a very direct question. What was the last moment you felt there was something greater than yourself present in your life? It could have been contemplating a sunset, listening to music, or simply in an instant of silence. If you feel comfortable, write in the comments, "I miss the sacred in my daily life," and briefly tell when that last moment was. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey, and I promise I'll read each comment with the care it deserves. Think about those rare moments in your own life when the anger suddenly lifts, when you feel connected to something infinitely larger than your individual concerns and struggles. Maybe it was standing at the edge of an ocean at sunset, feeling the vastness of the water stretching to the horizon, and suddenly understanding in your bones that you are part of something much greater than your personal problems. Maybe it was holding a newborn baby for the first time and sensing the incredible mystery that this small being represents. The miracle that consciousness exists at all in this vast cosmos. Maybe it was listening to a piece of music that seemed to speak directly to your soul, that transported you temporarily into a realm where beauty and meaning were the fundamental reality rather than struggle and frustration. Or perhaps it was a moment in nature when you really stopped and looked at a tree, not as an object but as a living being that has been reaching toward the light for decades or centuries, and you felt for an instant the profound interconnectedness of all life. Maybe it was a moment of genuine human connection when you looked into another person's eyes and saw not just their personality or their role in your life, but the eternal consciousness that looks out through every living being. Maybe it was a moment of profound solitude when you sat quietly and felt, beneath all the noise of your thoughts and worries, a deep stillness that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. In those moments, you weren't angry, were you? You felt complete, peaceful, aligned with something beyond your individual concerns. Time seemed to stop or expand. Your personal problems didn't disappear, but they took their proper place within a much larger context that made them bearable, even meaningful. You felt what Eliade would recognize as cosmic consciousness, the recognition that you are not separate from the sacred, but are actually an expression of it. Hierophanies, moments when the sacred manifests itself in your ordinary life, breaking through the veil of the purely profane and reminding you of who you really are and what life is really about. But our culture has systematically trained us to dismiss these experiences as mere emotions, as biochemical reactions in our brains, as pleasant but ultimately meaningless interludes in the serious business of survival and achievement. We're taught to treat them as luxuries we might indulge in occasionally, like watching a beautiful sunset or listening to inspiring music, rather than recognizing them as essential nutrients for the human soul, as vital to our well-being as food and water and air. We're encouraged to see them as subjective experiences that don't tell us anything real about the nature of existence, rather than understanding them as glimpses into the deeper reality that underlies all appearances. This dismissal is what Eliade called the desacralization of the world, and it's the root of modern psychological suffering. When we see the world as nothing but matter in motion, we become disconnected from the source of meaning that has sustained human beings for millennia. We start to believe that we are isolated individuals competing for resources in a meaningless universe. This belief creates chronic stress, a feeling that we must constantly defend ourselves. And what is anger but the emotional expression of this alienation? The ancient Babylonians understood something about human psychology that we've completely forgotten in our rush toward technological progress and material prosperity. When they built their great ziggurats, those massive stepped pyramids that rose from the flat Mesopotamian plains like artificial mountains, they weren't just constructing impressive buildings or monuments to royal power. They were creating what Eliade called axis mundi, sacred centers that served as connection points between heaven and earth, between the human realm and the divine realm, between the temporal world of change and decay and the eternal world of meaning and purpose. These structures reminded every person who saw them that they lived in a cosmos, not just a random collection of matter floating in empty space. The ziggurat at the center of each Babylonian city wasn't just architecture, it was a spiritual technology, a physical reminder that human life has a vertical dimension as well as a horizontal one. While people moved through their daily routines in the horizontal dimension, buying and selling, raising families, Dealing with the practical necessities of survival, the ziggurat pointed upward toward the realm of eternal meaning that gave context and purpose to all earthly activities. When people looked at it, they were reminded that their individual struggles were part of a cosmic story, that their personal dramas were episodes in a much larger narrative that extended from the beginning of time to the end of time. When these ancient peoples performed their elaborate New Year rituals, they weren't just celebrating the passage of time like we do with fireworks at midnight. They were participating in what Eliade called the eternal return, consciously stepping outside of historical time and into the primordial time when the world was first created. In these sacred moments, they weren't just observing the creation story, they were participating in it, renewing their connection to the creative force that brought everything into being. This wasn't primitive ignorance or pre-scientific thinking. It was sophisticated understanding of human psychology, recognition that people need regular opportunities to step outside linear time with its endless sequence of problems and solutions, and touch the eternal realm where temporal events acquire meaning. When individuals participated in these cosmic renewal ceremonies, their personal struggles became part of the great drama of order emerging from chaos, of light overcoming darkness. Compare this to our modern approach to time and meaning. We have no sacred centers, no axis mundi to remind us of our place in the cosmic order. Our cities are built according to traffic flow and economic efficiency rather than sacred geometry. Our tallest buildings house corporations rather than serving as connection points to the transcendent. Our calendars mark only mechanical time, divorced from natural rhythms. We have no rituals of renewal, no ceremonies that remind us we are participants in an eternal story. We've lost these connections. Our cities are built without sacred geography. Our calendars mark only mechanical time, not cosmic renewal. Our daily routines are organized around efficiency, not around maintaining connection to the transcendent. We live in what Eliade called a purely horizontal existence, moving through space and time but never touching the vertical dimension that gives life meaning. And then we wonder why we feel angry, frustrated, empty, like hamsters on a wheel that goes nowhere. But here's what Eliade discovered through his extensive research into religious consciousness across cultures and throughout history. And this offers genuine hope for those of us struggling with the chronic anger and meaninglessness that characterizes so much of modern life. The capacity for experiencing the sacred, for touching the transcendent dimension of existence, is not something learned or acquired, but something built into human nature itself. We are what he called homo religiosus, religious beings in the deepest sense. Creatures whose essential nature is to seek connection with something that transcends the purely personal and temporal. This capacity is not dependent on belief in any particular religious doctrine or participation in any specific tradition. It's deeper than theology, more fundamental than culture. It's written into the structure of human consciousness itself. Just as we have an innate capacity for language that expresses itself regardless of which particular language we learn, we have an innate capacity for sacred experience that will manifest itself regardless of the cultural forms available to us. This capacity cannot be permanently destroyed by secular education or materialistic culture. It can be suppressed, ignored, misdirected, covered over by layers of conditioning and distraction, but it's always there, waiting to be awakened, pushing toward expression even when we don't understand what we're feeling. Your chronic anger might actually be this sacred capacity, trying to break through the walls of a purely profane existence. It might be your homo religiosus nature rebelling against a way of life that systematically denies its deepest needs and most essential characteristics. Think about it this way. If you took a plant that was designed to live in sunlight and locked it in a dark room, it would begin to wither and show signs of distress. The withering wouldn't be a flaw in the plant, it would be evidence of the plant's essential nature asserting itself, trying to communicate that its basic needs weren't being met. Similarly, when you feel that constant low-grade anger and frustration, that sense that life should be more than what you're experiencing, that persistent feeling that something essential is missing even when all your material needs are met, you might be experiencing your spiritual nature trying to communicate that your basic need for transcendent connection is being systematically starved by a culture that has forgotten such needs even exist. Consider how often your anger erupts specifically when you're confronted with meaninglessness, with situations that treat you as less than the sacred being you essentially are. When you're stuck in traffic going to a job that feels pointless, when you're surrounded by people who seem to care only about superficial things, when you're forced to participate in bureaucratic systems that treat you like a number rather than a unique consciousness with infinite worth, when you're bombarded with advertising that tries to convince you that your value as a person depends on what you consume or achieve. Your rage in these moments isn't really about the external circumstances, is it? It's about the violation of your essential nature as a creature designed to live in conscious relationship with the eternal, with the sacred, with something that recognizes and honors your true dignity as a spiritual being. The great traditions understood this. They created elaborate systems of rituals, celebrations, pilgrimage routes, and sacred practices precisely to ensure that people regularly stepped out of profane time and space and into contact with the sacred dimension. The Sabbath in Judaism wasn't just a day of rest, it was a weekly return to the eternal. A time when the normal rules of linear existence were suspended and families could experience a taste of paradise. The Christian liturgical year wasn't just a calendar, it was a way of organizing life around the great cosmic story of death and resurrection, ensuring that every individual life remained connected to the ultimate drama of meaning. These weren't primitive superstitions but sophisticated technologies for maintaining psychological and spiritual health. When people lived within these frameworks, they had regular access to experiences that renewed their sense of purpose, that reminded them of their place in a meaningful cosmos, that healed the wounds created by daily struggle. They were less likely to fall into the kind of chronic anger that characterizes so much of modern life, because they had regular opportunities to step outside the framework of individual competition and frustration, and into a larger perspective, where their struggles made sense. You might be thinking, but I'm not religious, I don't believe in these old traditions. How does this help me? Here's what Eliade understood that's so crucial. The forms change, but the human need for contact with the sacred remains constant. You don't need to become religious in any traditional sense to begin healing the disconnection that's causing your anger. You need to recognize that your deepest nature requires regular contact with experiences that take you beyond the purely personal and put you in touch with something eternal and meaningful. This might be as simple as creating moments in your day when you step outside the rush of ordinary time and allow yourself to experience wonder. It might mean recognizing certain places that feel sacred to you and visiting them regularly. It might mean developing practices that put you in touch with the mystery and beauty that surrounds us always, but which our busy lives usually obscure. The specific form matters less than recognizing that these experiences are essential nutrients for the human soul. When you begin to incorporate even small touches of the sacred back into your daily life, you'll notice something remarkable happening to your anger. It begins to transform. Not because you're suppressing it, but because the conditions that created it are changing. You're no longer living as an isolated individual struggling alone against meaningless circumstances. You're beginning to remember your place in the larger story, your connection to the eternal patterns that give shape and purpose to existence. Eliade wrote about the myth of the eternal return, the idea that the most meaningful events are those that connect us to primordial time, to the moment of creation itself. Every sunrise, every birth, every genuine moment of love or beauty is an opportunity to participate in this eternal return, to step outside linear time and touch the source from which all meaning flows. When you learn to recognize these moments and give them proper importance, life stops feeling like arbitrary frustration and begins to reveal itself as a sacred journey. The anger you feel isn't your enemy. It's your inner wisdom trying to tell you that you're living beneath your true nature. It's your soul's refusal to accept a purely profane existence. Instead of trying to eliminate this anger through techniques, what if you listened to what it's trying to tell you? What if you used it as a compass pointing toward the sacred dimensions of life you've lost touch with? Every moment you spend in genuine appreciation of beauty, every time you allow yourself to feel truly grateful for the mystery of existence, every instant when you recognize your deep connection to other beings, you're performing what Eliade would call a sacred act. You're breaking the spell of pure profanity that keeps you trapped in anger and frustration. You're remembering who you really are and why you're here. This isn't about becoming a different person or changing your entire life overnight. It's about recognizing that the life you're already living is full of opportunities for sacred experience if you know how to see them. The morning light coming through your window, the feeling of your breath moving in and out of your body, the simple miracle that you exist at all in this vast cosmos, these are all hierophanies waiting to be recognized. The path back to wholeness isn't complicated, but it does require consistency and intention. It means making a daily choice to step outside the purely mechanical view of existence and remember that you are a sacred being living in a sacred world. Every time you make this choice, you're performing a small act of resistance against the forces that want to keep you trapped in anger and meaninglessness. You're participating in your own liberation. Think about the last time you felt truly at peace. Chances are, it wasn't when you had solved all your problems or eliminated all sources of frustration from your life. It was probably in a moment when you felt connected to something larger than yourself, when you experienced what Eliade called cosmic consciousness, the recognition that you are part of an infinite web of being that extends far beyond your individual concerns. This is your birthright as a human being. This is what you're angry about losing. This is what you can reclaim. The sacred isn't something you have to travel to find or pay money to access. It's woven into the fabric of every ordinary moment, waiting to be recognized by eyes that have remembered how to see. When you walk outside and really notice the sky, when you look into another person's eyes and see the mystery of consciousness looking back at you, when you feel genuine gratitude for the incredible fact of your existence, you're touching the same eternal reality that mystics and sages throughout history have pointed toward. Your anger has been your faithful companion, trying to wake you up to the fact that you've been sleepwalking through a sacred life, treating it as merely mundane. But now you have a choice. You can continue to interpret your anger as evidence that the world is against you, or you can recognize it as your soul's call to remember who you really are and why you're here. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes that there's a different path, a deeper way to understand your own spiritual journey. I know what it's like to feel lost amid so much noise of the modern world, seeking answers that always seem to slip through your fingers. That's why I created this space, this refuge where we can explore together the ancient wisdom that still pulses alive in our hearts. When you subscribe to this channel, you're not just clicking a button, you're joining a community of people who, like you, feel that life has deeper layers waiting to be discovered. Here you'll find not just knowledge, but genuine embrace for your thirst for meaning. Subscribe now and be part of this journey of rediscovering the sacred in everyday life. Your soul deserves this gift. The path back to wholeness isn't about changing your external circumstances. The transformation happens through changing your relationship to existence itself, through remembering that you are not random atoms struggling alone in a meaningless universe, but a sacred being participating in a cosmic story that has been unfolding for billions of years. When you begin to live from this recognition, everything changes, not because your problems disappear, but because they take their proper place within a larger context that gives them meaning. Your daily struggles become opportunities for spiritual growth rather than evidence that life is meaningless. Your relationships deepen because you begin to see others as fellow sacred beings on the same journey of awakening. Most importantly, you begin to recognize that every moment is filled with opportunities for sacred experience. When you drink your morning coffee with full attention, really tasting it and appreciating the simple miracle that such pleasure exists, you're performing a sacred act. When you look up at the stars and feel the vastness of the cosmos and your mysterious place within it, you're participating in a hierophany. When you listen deeply to another person, really hearing the consciousness that speaks through them, you're engaging in spiritual practice as profound as any formal meditation. These experiences are available to you right now. The morning light coming through your window is the same light that has blessed the earth for billions of years, connecting you to the creative force of the universe. The feeling of your breath is direct participation in the life force that animates all beings. The simple fact that you exist at all, that consciousness has emerged in this cosmos and is aware of itself through your awareness, is perhaps the greatest miracle of all. But recognizing these sacred dimensions requires what Eliade called a reorientation of consciousness. Instead of sleepwalking through your days focused only on immediate problems, you need to cultivate sacred attention, the ability to see the transcendent dimension that's always present, but usually hidden by preoccupation with practical concerns. This isn't about becoming impractical, but about recognizing that the sacred and practical are different aspects of the same reality. When you approach your work with sacred attention, you see it not just as earning money, but as contributing to the larger human project. When you approach relationships with sacred attention, you see others not just as sources of pleasure or frustration, but as sacred beings worthy of love. When you approach your struggles with sacred attention, you understand them as opportunities opportunities for spiritual growth. This transformation doesn't happen overnight but requires ongoing practice, a daily choice to remember who you really are. Every time you choose to see the sacred dimension rather than getting lost in purely profane concerns, you're performing an act of resistance against forces that want to keep you trapped in anger. You're participating in your own liberation. Your anger has been your faithful companion, trying to wake you up to the fact that you've been sleepwalking through a sacred life. But now you have a choice. You can continue to interpret your anger as evidence that the world is against you, or you can recognize it as your soul's call to remember who you really are. The choice is yours, and it's available in every moment. Your transformation isn't just personal healing. It's participating in healing our broken world, helping to birth a new culture that remembers the sacred nature of existence itself.